You're listening to Fish Out of Water, the podcast where feeling out of place becomes the start of something new. Dive in with us. Let's explore stories, insights, and real conversations that help you swim forward with purpose.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Fish Out of Water. Today, we are going to be talking about the supportive core temperament style and how they move and shift through fear and moving them from fear into a place of strength. And so, one of the things that we were talking about prior to recording here, Brett, if you recall, I'm a supportive, so we were working through some of the things that I operate out of fear, and talked about some of the core things that make up that supportive style. So can we just dive into this today? And because I feel like there's so much I want to talk about because it's about me.
I think that as communicators, there's nothing more powerful than really knowing where we sit. Whether we're moving within this collaborative, communal experience, or project management, or trying to move people from one location, whether relationally, project-wise, in kind of any way. And I think that the dynamic of the supportive style is when steadiness holds, or when steadiness anchors the room, is really the sense of always having home, both relationally, kind of being reminded of where we are currently, what we're trying to get to, and that making sure that everyone's moving together. It's almost like the caravan experience, so that everyone is kind of kept safe. That the supportive style is the person that is making sure every wagon's in line, no one's got a broken wheel, no one's falling off the pace, and that as individuals are going to move from their fear, and to be reminded, fear isn't what's threatening us,
Right.
It is coming to the recognition of what is it that's missing in my life? Where is my gap? What is the limitation? And so that if we really quickly just review, we have the reflective style is seeking clarity. The intentional style is looking for connection. The supportive is bringing the steadiness, that's what they're seeking, is steadiness. And the empowered is looking or seeking direction. And I think that in the fear module, we're seeking it. And in the expression, as we move through our motivation into our expression, we're actually bringing this, which is really we're trying to set the horizon point with these conversations. And I hope that we've done it with our first two, and that the idea of how do we as individuals move, but how do we bring others along with us for the journey? I mean, I think even for yourself, talk a little bit about where you've seen people come alongside you, you have felt support as you're being supportive, and what are some of those challenges that you were sharing with me kind of before we press record, of what does it mean when that's not necessarily happening for you?
Yeah. So I think a story that I haven't shared with you, but I think is relevant in this moment is it was after our conversation yesterday. I was thinking back on a meeting where I would call it a meeting where it was a defining moment for myself, where I started to step out of staying quiet, if you would, and really stepping into being authentically me and speaking up when before I would hold back. So for me as a supportive person, I have a tendency of stepping back from what's going on, not stepping back so much as it is just remaining an observer and quiet and listening and trying to hear and identify the things that are not necessarily being addressed, and making sure that, hey, have we thought of this? You're going to, down the road, you're going to say, oh, you're a wonder, Elisa, which is something entirely that we're going to talk about down the road. But in this supportive role, looking at my boss, who was very, he was a hunter from a sales perspective. He was a hunter, like, let's get this done, let's push these people, very classic D in the sense of pushing forward and getting things done. And I was kind of the person who would bring up the rear and make sure some of those stuff got done, or someone was assigned to bring attention to whatever area it was. And in this particular meeting, I found that I really started to point out things that he was not concerned about that was affecting our business. And I think it was the first time that he stopped and he said, wow, like, I never saw that before. And I'm really glad that you brought that up. And in that moment, it wasn't a matter of being seen for me so much as it is like I was finding my place, my way of leading in that environment and that situation. Um, so then, yes, earlier when we were talking, the second thing on my core temperament is I show up much like an E. So I can be pretty loud sometimes, not what most people expect. Um, but I was looking at it as when I was feeling weak, I was operating in that empowered uh, temperament and being louder and so on. And you explained some really cool things to me that helped me understand that, you know, when we operate in fear, it doesn't, how do I say? It's okay to be afraid. It's okay to have these things that you have doubts about and so on. But the next question is, how are we showing up?
Mhm.
For me as a supportive, I find that when I'm operating in fear, I really go into myself, become introspective, and I don't speak up as much. Whereas when I'm not operating in fear, regardless of what the situation is, I'm way more willing to share what's on my mind and the way that I'm seeing things. So I don't know if I've answered your question, but in my experience as a supportive, this is the things that I see about myself.
And I think that as you kind of brought that story through, each of the core focus for the supportive style exists is that there's an awareness of kind of what's happening,
Yeah.
whether it's the communal, the relational,
Yeah.
and the project component. And it's the grounding that you bring. It's that anchoring. Like the you referred to the boss as the hunter. Well, the hunter has to have a place to come home to. They have to recognize that, hey, just being out doing the thing doesn't necessarily mean that it's healthy for everyone back at camp. That there needs to be this process. And I think in our conversation yesterday was we dove a little bit deeper for yourself, recognizing that you are strong in your quietness. And quietness isn't, and a word that often gets thrown around in our communities is like meekfulness or humility or humbleness. And I find that it can be so false at times that
Yeah.
when we are supposed to speak, we don't, because we don't want to be an offense to somebody. When speaking what's in your heart, what you're seeing, what you're observing isn't or shouldn't be offensive.
Hmm.
Um, and that the courage to bring relational safety. And so the the idea of recognizing where the limitation, where the gap, our fear is, again, not which is threatening, but it's where is that uncertainty, and
Yes.
how do I not try to be somebody else?
Yeah.
How do I learn more about me and why I'm tuned this way? All of a sudden made way for you to accept the moment where loudness is real for you.
Yeah. And I think reframing that whole thing of loudness, because I think the I had this angst about being too loud and being too loud saying the wrong thing.
Mm,
And so reframing for me was, this needs to be said, it needs to be shared, but that doesn't mean that I'm being loud. I'm just simply sharing what needs to be said. And whether people want to hear it or not is not up to me, and doesn't define whether what I'm saying is important or correct or wrong or whatever. It just is what it is. And I think when I recognized that, when I really, was able to sit back and wrap my head around what it was that I was, the place of fear and uncertainty that was operating in, and now like stepping into this place of authenticity, and like, this really feels like me. It was a huge thing for me, because I started to show
Hmm.
up in ways that I hadn't shown up before, and all of a sudden people were asking me things that they wouldn't, I was never included in. I was asked to be in certain planning meetings and so on. I'm like, why all of a sudden, like, who's the celebrity in the room? Like, not, I'm joking.
Yeah,
Seriously, I'm
yeah,
joking.
yeah.
But, for that moment in time when all of those things started to come together as I started to show up, I wasn't trying harder. I wasn't being something that I thought everybody else wanted to be. I was simply just being me and being present and sharing that being present. What was inside me needed to come out so that other people couldn't take it and do with it what they wanted with it. It was a huge thing for me. So, the one thing that we didn't mention about the supportive really comes down to that idea of being predictable and putting this high value on relationships.
Mm.
Because one of the areas of fear that I also struggle with is like, what if I say this in the wrong tone and this person takes it the wrong way? And there were times where I would just go back into myself and not address something that needed to be addressed. And um, it was holding me back from, again, being in that place of presence, because I have such a high value. I place such a high value on relationships. So how do we, like, I know what the answer is because I've done it for myself, but how do we supportive people move from this place of operating out of like this high value of relationship and stability and so on? What's the opposite of that?
Well, I don't know that there's necessarily an opposite. So Jim Collins wrote an amazing book many years ago now, in the early 2000s, called Good to Great. And it becomes, there's a hinge moment for any successful company. And it's kind of built around the Tucker model of group formation. And we have the forming stage, then we have the norming stage. Then we get into this storming moment where
Okay.
relationships all of a sudden start to break down. And then we have this performing stage. And that only organizations, groups, and communities that move from storming to norming, I believe. So it's forming, storming, norming. And then you get into the performing side. That there is this moment.
Mhm.
And that moment is when all of the people that are at the table go, I need to see everyone not as myself, but as someone who's got my back.
Right.
We don't do this very well in westernized culture. Like, we really are lone rangers.
Yeah.
And I have lived in this identity and this terminology for many, many years in my work, where we're anticipated or expected to be superhuman. You look at a job description today, and it
They
is,
want you
you
to do
have to
everything.
do everything. And
Yeah.
I'm like, are you kidding? Like, you would want everything done mediocrity? Like, you would want it done so medium? That's not even the right word, but you would want it done so, just get it done. I don't care how good it is or what, versus all of a sudden, what if it was, I did this little tiny thing so well, but then Lisa did this tiny thing so well. All of a sudden, we've got 3, 4, or 5 things that are being done with excellence. So everything comes back to the relationship. And so the idea of how does the supportive build into the intentional?
Mm-hmm.
How does the reflective make room for the supportive and what they see, so that the intentional and the empowering all of a sudden come together with their core strengths? And so remembering that in the supportive, our focus in moving from fear to motivation is building this safety, is
Mm-hmm.
building something that's very predictable, that there is an essential understanding of what the team is. Like, I often see the supportive style when they are operating in their strength as the glue, as the person that reminds me, not
Mm-hmm.
a supportive primary, to come back to the group, to pause, to listen, to know that each voice is going to bring something unique. And so that there becomes this relational trust.
Mm-hmm.
There becomes a core acknowledgement that I see you and I trust you. And so what often can happen is the supportive is seen as the passive. The supportive is seen as somebody who is so relationally minded that we're never going to get anything done. And I'm like, but what if it is through the relationship that everything gets done? But we miss this because we
Yeah.
never actually move from storming to norming. Like, we never get to the place where, okay, we're equal. And we talked about this in season 1 when we talked about the plurality of leadership, the plurality of all of the voices being heard, not democracy. And again, I'm not getting into politics per se, but that every voice is equal, in that, where are we at in the phase of execution or development?
Yeah.
There is a moment when your voice, your supportive style, is the most important thing that happens in the room. But that's not all the time.
No. And that goes for anybody, not just the
All
supportive,
of
but
Yes, yes.
there's a time and place for everything, right? And
Mhm.
um, we're all built for different moments, and it's a matter of being present so that you can show up when you're needed. So I think it's really important to insert that here because, as you're rightfully saying, we live in a society where everything is measured
Mhm.
and measured by dollars, measured by, KPIs and so on. And you and I believe this is why we do what we do. That relationship is such a key point that is immeasurable because it impacts everything. Um, the companies that can do so well, you look at their internal, not their structure, but their environment, their culture, where there's mutual respect and so on, they can get some stuff done. That's not to say that, places of toxicity don't get stuff done, because clearly some stuff's being pushed through,
Mhm.
can get pushed through. However, there's something different about places with this healthy culture where people value the relationships of the people that they work with. Doesn't mean everybody gets along, but there's a mutual respect and there's a mutual understanding of
Mhm.
this is who this person is. This is how I need to operate around them, for because we don't jive or whatever, but we can get our stuff done and get along. And yeah, I wish I'll end with this here is I really wish there was a way to measure relationship in a meaningful way when it comes to business specifically.
I'm a big sports fan. I don't know. We've talked a lot about this,
We haven't.
and we haven't. And so then to use what you've just described in its execution in a sports setting.
That would be the
I
best example.
I think maybe, right?
Yeah.
The Toronto Blue Jays in the year of 2025. They get all the way to the World Series. They do lose in Game 7. Very sad. But in 2024, they were the last place team. Like, they were the last place team, which
Mm-hmm.
means they were not performing.
Mm-hmm.
Something happened in 2024 as the players themselves created a community, created an experience where all of a sudden this trust began to be formed. And if you go back through and you hear the stories of how this team drew together in 2025, there was not a optional practice that not every player didn't show up to, because they so cared for one another that they all wanted to be together.
Mm-hmm.
They all acknowledged, regardless of the role that they were given, they had a significance to bring to the outcome. They, in 2025, they had the most come from behind victories
Mm-hmm.
out of all of the major league teams. And so as I sit and understand this, I am wondering what this looks like in business, where if business is the game, if
Mm-hmm.
business is this moment, and you as the supportive, anyone who's sitting in the midst of this supportive is coming from this grounded strength, from this space where the idea of bringing support, stabilization, and the sustain, where people know that they're heard, know that there is something different here than there is somewhere else. We get to measure both the process and the outcome, not just the outcome.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we're not sacrificing one for the other.
Right.
And so when we look at that internal idea, and you shared this so well, you stop shrinking. You stopped remaining silent just for the sake of silence, and you begin to recognize where your voice was.
Yeah.
That there is this hinge moment, talked about with the Blue Jays, but there's a moment where we're not maintaining the peace, we're creating peace. And peace is where everyone has a role. Everyone has that kind of sustain that moment. And that we're calling people into that engagement. The confusion becomes that the supportive style, often the quieter person, maybe a little bit more on the introverted scale, remain in that place because they're simply not used to being
It's
granted the
easier.
opportunity.
Yeah.
And it's easier for
Yeah.
sure. And so I think that rather than holding back and avoiding the tension, the what can be done for you, kind of, and do this in 2 minutes or less, what can be done in order to invite you into that process? Like, what would somebody who's listening to this, who is supportive, what is it they need to ask for, or what is it they need to recognize in order to feel that moment?
So I guess there's a list of things, but we'll start with internal, because really, if you're not recognizing internally of where you're at, it's really hard to ask externally for what you need, right? And so recognizing that internal cue of I'm shrinking here, or I'm remaining in this shrunk place. I don't have a better word because that's the one that works for me here. Trying to maintain the peace and so on, but like, why am I staying quiet here when these things seem so clear to me and I'm not voicing them, right?
Mm-hmm,
And then
mm-hmm,
because the supportive people are about relations, now, okay, what do I ask? Well, if you have a friend, colleague going into a meeting, I'm going to say even friend going into a social situation, maybe it's a party or whatever, ask them to help to draw you out. Okay, that's your partnership, that's your collaboration, that's your um, maintaining relationship with someone that you trust, in that they know you well enough that they know that you see things that aren't always brought up, that you have ways of bringing things up that will draw other people in and so on. Get them to help you to engage by formally inviting you into the conversation, or what do you think, and really putting you on the spot, as much as that might be like, oh, that's gonna freak me out. The point is that you're being given this invitation from someone that knows you well, that they can identify you probably are going to have something really interesting to share right now that everybody else needs to hear. And
Hmm.
then reflecting even after that situation is, where did I hold back? Why was I holding back? How could I have handled that better? And the next time this happens, what's one thing that I could do that's different, right? So it's this asking for input as a supportive person from people is something that is invaluable, because we tend to be a lot more introverted. We can overthink things.
Hmm.
And getting that input from others on how you handled something, or should I have said this, or will start to help you to identify these areas and behaviors and habits of holding back and staying quiet. And hopefully, the feedback will be provided in such a way that's going to embolden you to step out of that box that you allow yourself to sit in, right?
Hmm.
So one thing too is, maybe in a meeting when everybody says, does anybody have anything else? Have something ready to say in that moment at the end of the meeting, just for the sake of saying it, just for the practice of it.
Hmm.
And then last thing is, as a supportive person, steadiness and relationship is our superpower.
Hmm.
And learning how to operate in that's from a place of comfort for you. You've got to find that for yourself. But it's such a needed thing in the world that we live in today. And so I just want to point out that it's a core strength. It's something that you should celebrate and learn to master, because that is not something that everybody can do naturally.
Hmm. I think that this is a perfect moment to just kind of let's descend down, let's land the plane of this episode on this one kind of thought. And we didn't do this for the two previous episodes, but I think there's something here that's really, really interesting that you are opening up to. And in the permission to be rewired, we're not just rewiring us as individuals, but we're trying to reorder or rewire the sense of community and kind of the management of projects or outcomes. And so then if you're not a reflective, don't think that they're simply trying to be a stick in the mud.
Yeah.
Don't think that they're so focused on the pros and cons and what could go wrong. And they're not just stuck there. They're trying to find this sense of clarity. The intentional is looking to connect. Am I being heard? Is my presence being of value? Is the supportive steady? Are we together? And if we're not together, what are we doing to get together onto that same page? And we'll share the next one in our next episode. But the idea that if you're not one of these styles, how can you see the motivation and the expression, not just the fear?
Thanks everybody for joining us this week. We are so privileged to have you with us, and we look forward to seeing you in the next episode. So hopefully you have some stories that you could share with your experiences as you've been learning with us, and we look forward to chatting again soon. Have an awesome week.
Bye, everyone.